everyone, and welcome to the Squad Room Podcast, the place for cops who want to transform their leadership, create more resilience, and generate more balance in their life. On this show, we cover the tactics and strategies you can use every day to create a life worth living, both in and out of uniform. My name is Garrett Teslaw, and I'm a full-time lieutenant for a sheriff's office in Southern California, and I'm glad you're with us today. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind you of a few things. First, if you're on social media, make sure you're following us at The Squad Room and that you've liked our Facebook page. Also, make sure to join our Facebook group. Just search the Squad Room group to join. But most importantly is that you head over to thesquadroom.net and get signed up for our mailing list. People on that list get exclusive access to free resource downloads and a weekly email from me on things you need to know about. I also send out content that's exclusive to that list, so don't miss out on something that can help you in your life or in your job. Join our list at thesquadroom.net. I recently had an experience that made me so thankful to have officerprivacy.com as a partner in keeping my family safe. Like many of you, I'm often tasked with handling media inquiries around newsworthy events that my agency is involved in. We had an anti-government and anti-police group that got some media attention recently, and my name was out there in the papers as our spokesman on the issue. It turned out that some of the agitators don't live very far from me. It was a troubling reminder I'm often confronted with, one that is made worse because I live in the area where I also work. It's not uncommon for me to encounter people at the grocery store, the gas station, or the gym that I've had some sort of professional interaction with. I'm constantly reminded of how easy it is to be exposing my family to the dangers of my job, and how easy it is to find information about me on the internet. So on the same day that my name was out there in the papers and on the internet about this anti-police group, I got my regular report from officerprivacy.com. The report showed me how they're monitoring the top 50 people search sites on the web to make sure that my information is deleted and stays deleted from these sites. They wipe your information from sites like LexisNexis and Spokio, White Pages, and many more. OfficerPrivacy.com offers 2 packages to choose from to help you clean up your side of the internet. Their premium service allows you to sit back and let the professionals do the work, where they will scrub the internet's top 50 people search sites that can expose your home address. They then work to maintain your privacy by monitoring those same sites. If you show up again, they'll remove you again. They also offer an at-home solution for those of you that have the time and the technical ability. Using their proprietary software, you can remove yourself and your family members from those same top 50 people search sites on the internet, and then use the software to conduct audits as often as you'd like to make sure that you haven't been added back. To learn more about how they can keep you safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/the squad room. When you sign up through that link, you'll get 2 free months of monitoring and data removal, plus a free cell phone privacy device when you sign up. Shift bids to overtime and special events, vacation requests, court overtime, and unexpected critical incidents and major disasters. The schedule is like a living, breathing beast that must be wrestled with at every level of an agency. If your agency is still living in the dark ages, running off an Excel spreadsheet, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's why I'm so impressed with InTime. InTime is designed specifically for public safety agencies, from police and sheriff's offices to corrections, dispatch, and fire agencies. Their cloud-based system and their smartphone app allow officers to access the system from anywhere to sign up for overtime, submit vacation requests, and get updated on court subpoenas. Their system is incredibly easy to use and only takes a few minutes, not hours, to understand and begin using. Major agencies like the Anaheim Police Department, Pittsburgh Police, Passaic County Sheriff's Office, CAL FIRE, and many others trust InTime to save them time and money. If you're interested in spending less time on scheduling, eliminating redundant and expensive overtime, increasing your compliance with subpoenas, and reducing the stress and fatigue on your employees, please, I beg of you, go to intime.com/the squad room to learn more about their system. Matt Thomas, welcome to the Squad Room. Thanks for being here, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. You've got quite the career. You have the energy of a rookie, I think, at least from what I see. And I thought today would be a great opportunity to sit down and talk with you about some of the things that I wish we can, or that I want us to be able to pass on to the newer generation. You know, we're in a really challenging time everywhere in law enforcement with recruitment and retention. And I want to talk about some of the things you've done on that end, but also, you know, I've made my own mistakes and my own trip ups in my own career. Mm-hmm. And I know you have too, only because I know you've been in it for 29, 30 years. So you're bound to have found some insights. I want to just spend the hour we have to kind of just teasing out some of those issues, and not only just for the next generation, but for the guys who are like me, mid-career, or like you looking towards the sunset years of their career. and I say that only because you have 30 years on. I'm not saying you're, old and out.
I'm old and out, dude.
Yeah, but I get emails all the time from guys who are, looking at, okay, I got 5 years left till retirement. What do I do? Or I just retired and now I realize, man, I made some real big mistakes.
Yeah.
And I'd love to prevent some of those for some people. That's the goal of today. And so I want to start. Usually we start with, the whole backstory and working narcotics and the cool stories. But I actually want to start with the fact that you've been married now for almost 30 years, right?
Yeah, it'll be 30 years in July.
And it seems that you also started at the agency. You're at Pinal County Sheriff's Office in Arizona. You started the agency the same year, right?
Yeah, I started in April of '93, and then my wife and I got married in July of '93, and married in uniform at the court above the jail that I was working at.
I got engaged during the academy and everyone thought that was a crazy idea just because of all the changes that go on in your life at the time. So 30 years later, that's amazing. Congratulations, first of
Thank you.
all.
Yeah.
As a guy coming up on 17, I know, there's a lot of things that a law enforcement marriage has to experience that other marriages don't. And
Yes.
if you could share some of your perspective on that, but also what has made your marriage successful, because I've heard you talk about the importance of it.
Yeah.
But let's share with people, like, what are some of the things we can do daily basis, long term, about protecting that sanctity of that relationship?
Ooh, man, that's deep. Well, like first and foremost, she's always right. Like I think we know that as dudes, right? Let's just get that out there. The wife is always right. They're always smarter than us. Um, Now, I think really for us, I think it's cool starting together. For us, it was anyways. Well, maybe my wife doesn't agree with that, but I thought it was cool because you kind of grow into it together, right? I think it would be a little more difficult had I been seasoned and then got married, because where I was at when I considered myself seasoned, I was probably 7 years into it, and I was a totally different person then than I was when I started. And I think the me at that time, 7 years in, would have been a lot harder to deal with had we not created the life together already, from the start. So I think it was easier for us to start together, grow together, kind of figure it out. And it was full of rough times. It's not easy. It's just like this career. It's not easy because you're in a career where you're dealing with a lot of stuff. You're trying to protect your family from that stuff, or you think you are. And that causes you issues at home. And then, of course, we all have normal home issues, right? We all have bills to pay. We all have kids that are going to school, that are playing sports. We have a spouse that a lot of times doesn't understand the stuff we're dealing with, nor really do we want them to understand the stuff we're dealing with. So a lot of navigation, man. And I think the biggest key to all of that, why I'm giving you all that, is communication was the big part. And I think it was tough for us because my wife is an introvert. And so, as you know, introverts aren't big on confrontation, communication, and just getting things out there. And then at the same time, I'm a cop who's coming home not wanting to talk about the things that I'm dealing with at work. So it makes it really hard when you have two people, one that's forcing themselves not to communicate to try and shield your family, and the other one that is not really a communicator by nature, just tends to keep to herself, and not necessarily shut down, but just not communicative for those kind of situations. And so we had to work through a lot of that stuff, and force ourselves into conversations. And I would say it was probably more her forcing herself into my head and my world, and forcing me to discuss some of the stuff that we were dealing with as a family, that I was dealing with at work. Because she would know, and as you guys know, any of you that have been married doing this job, they know something's going on, but a lot of times they don't know what's going on. And so when we would actually communicate, talk those things through, it was a lot better. And there was times in our our marriage of 30 years that we were on the verge of divorce just because of all the crap and we weren't getting along. And so we had to navigate all that too. And I think the biggest thing that kept us going is our love for each other was real. Like no matter hard times or not, I always loved her to my core, and I feel she loved me to her core. So that helped us get through a lot of the crap. And then not being a quitter, man. I was just one of those guys. I'm not going to quit this. I'm not going to give up. And so I would constantly fight to keep it together. And luckily, I had a fighter in her too, and she fought to keep it together. And so we were able to hold it all together, get through the rough patches, and now kind of like my career, we're on the sunset of the family stuff too, because we've got one kid left at home. The rest of them are adults out on their own. And so as I approach the end of my career, we also approach a life change where we're going to be empty nesters. And that's where you have to spend the rest of your life with this person now. And is this a person that I want to do that with? And I think going through all of that has forged a strong marriage and a strong relationship. And so we're at the end of this where I am so happy that I did not screw it up, because she's the only one that I really want to be with and spend, my dying days with. So,
That's awesome. And it's so interesting to me because starting the career and the marriage at the same time and changing together, I sometimes wonder, because I had a similar experience. In fact, when I met my wife, I was in a completely different career. It was actually like a night and day from what I do now. I was in the music industry.
oh, wow.
Yeah, working at a record label and like going to concerts in Hollywood and like hanging out with rock stars, right? And so on like our first date, I told her I actually wanted to become a cop, and she didn't flinch. So that was, that was the first clue that this might be a keeper. And then turns out her dad is now a retired cop as well, so she's got history with it.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it would have been easier for us if I had just kind of gotten settled, gotten that seasoned approach that you said, and then whoever came into my life, or if she came into my life at that point, it was easier because I was more settled, I guess. But because I think every cop who's been married for any length of time, who's been a cop for more than a couple of years, gets that "you've changed" speech from their
Yeah.
wife, right,
Yeah.
or their husband,
Yep.
and like you just said, you try to shield your family from a lot of those issues. And the response I had at the time was, "Of course I've changed. I now understand how the real world works, and you just don't." Right.
Right. Right.
And that's not the right answer, by the way, for
Nope.
anybody out there.
No.
Um, but there must come a time when you have to balance, or you just said it, that, okay, I can't possibly shield them from everything I'm dealing with and be honest about my own experience in life, and
Right.
then be open to this relationship and communication. You've got kids, I've got kids. I struggle still with how much to share and at what ages. What I learned a couple years ago was that my kids, despite all the efforts I have to shield them from this stuff, they sense just the anxiety of it, the
Mm-hmm.
tension, right? And
Yep.
with the marriage and then come the kids, how have you approached it with your children? Because that's something I still navigate daily.
Man, dude, that's tough. And especially for me, I grew up in predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, and my wife is, very strong Hispanic family, very traditional values. And for those who don't understand the Mexican culture, you don't talk about that stuff, right? You just especially for a dad to sit there and explain to his kids, this is what dad did at work and stuff like that. It's not very natural, anyways. And then in that culture, it's definitely not a natural thing. So I was navigating that as well, because we were around her family, around the Mexican culture quite a bit. My kids kind of came up in that, and then my side of the family was probably a lot different from that. Not probably, they were a lot different. Very communicative and very, let's talk about things. And so I struggled with that too. I struggled with, I want to solve problems. I want to talk it out. I want to get everything out on the table, and let's figure it out. And like I said before, my wife is an introvert, plus she comes from the Mexican culture. And it was kind of like, just leave me alone and, it'll work itself out kind of situation. And then with the kids, I think that's probably how we approached it is like, if they ask questions, we'll deal with it then. But other than that, let's just let life be life. And I really tried to let them, like, they knew dad was a cop, and they knew dad wasn't home a lot. I was, out on the street. I worked nights. I was on call the majority of my career because I did a lot of specialty assignments. So they knew dad had a volatile schedule. They knew dad was out doing cop stuff, but they never really knew what that consisted of. Um, and I don't know that we had deep conversations about that. And typically, what you find also is that kids, the younger kids, while they're inquisitive, it's not as deep as we think, right? You know, I always think about there's a story, and I'll jack up the story, but there's a story about a kid that's asking dad about like where babies come from, and so dad gets into deep discussion on the differences between males and females and how they fall in love, and the kid was just looking for like the stomach. It comes from mom's stomach. That would have been a sufficient answer, and so
Right.
I think the same as I went through my career and dealt with kids, we kind of did the same thing. We just gave them surface answers. And if they wanted more, we would go down those rabbit holes, but we would be careful how we did that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's challenging, especially as now the parent of a teenager and a soon to be teenager, a tween. Like now they're starting to interact with the people who have formed opinions about the police
Mhm.
based on older brothers or older sisters or family members now, and they're not uh, at the high school level. They're not always like, not my kids, but I mean the kids in general, like that
Right.
age, aren't always excited to see you anymore, right?
Right.
And so they're
Right.
getting inputs from these other directions and from teachers, and starting to ask a lot of good questions, but uh, broad questions too about the experience we've had. And it is definitely the most challenging part of it. I really like too how you considered your wife's personality as part of this issue, because I think we often just kind of blame our history or our job for our woes. And I'm not saying we blame our spouse, but just like it's another consideration in the mix, right? It's like that
Right.
recipe of communication is
Right.
not just you and how you grew up, and not just your job, but also there is two parties in this, and to consider that.
Yeah.
It struck me that you kind of have this double whammy of navigating your wife's Mexican heritage, and also being in a job that just generally discourages discussing these kinds of things.
Right.
Right. So,
Right.
so in that environment, what did you do for yourself to take care of yourself and to off gas some of that stress and, deal with the things we've seen?
Man, the biggest thing has been really my gym time. Like, gym time for me is my mental health, working out, and it started out as more of a wanting to be the master of my craft, right? And I wanted to. I lost my very first foot pursuit when I was a brand new rookie cop, and that was the worst feeling in the world. Coming out of the chute and losing a foot pursuit, and I was like, okay, that's it. I'm like, that's not happening again. And so I changed, and I had a little extra weight then, and wasn't working out much, and so that was when I said no more. I'm gonna, you know, I've got this job. Lives depend on it. My life depends on it, and I'm tasked with doing a certain function, and I got to be the master of that function. So I started working out for those reasons, but then it became very therapeutic for me. It's my time to think. It's my time to just like listen to music and veg out and sweat and work off all that stuff that builds up in us as cops as we're dealing with the streets. And so that's probably one of the bigger ones on a daily basis is the workout stuff. I also earlier in my career, I've gotten away from it as I got older because it just hurts so much now. Is martial arts, and so I was doing martial arts. I was doing JKD, which is Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee's form of martial arts, and it
Hmm.
incorporated a lot of ground fighting, stick fighting, that kind of stuff. That was definitely a mental release and one of my escapes. And then hunting and fishing is probably the thing I love to do most, getting out and just being away from everything and just you and nature. And especially if I can get drawn, if I'm lucky enough to get drawn for a big game tag like an elk tag. Just I'm a bow hunter, so going out and stalking an animal like that with a bow is, there's just, I think it takes us back to our caveman roots, and there's just something that at the core of you that enjoys that, and you come back feeling just ready to conquer the world when you do something like that. So those are generally speaking the things that keep me calm and are my off gassing, and
Mm-hmm.
then of course this goes right in hand with the job, but shooting full auto weapons is probably one of the best stress relievers I've ever had, man. When you go out and you just let them rip for no apparent reason at no particular target and just having fun, that's definitely another area I love.
I'm in California, so I wouldn't know what that experience is like.
Oh yeah, dude. So over here in America, we have these things called guns, full auto sometimes.
What I hear in that is that you've been able to maintain different identities about yourself too throughout the career, right? Not just cop,
Right.
and you were in some high level positions or like stressful, but also like very important positions because considering you're part of the country where you're right there in Pinal County, which is in southern Arizona, very
Mhm.
close to the Mexican border. In fact, you wrote a book, which we'll touch on in a bit, about them dealing with the Mexican cartels. But
Yep.
so many of the people I see that struggle with the career are people who dive into an assignment like narcotics, like undercover work, and then they assume that identity
Hmm.
as their person. That is everything about them. They forget that being a father is part of the role, or
Right.
that being married is part of the role, or that a hunter is being part of their identity. And we chip away at these things until all that's left is cop.
Hmm.
And because, families left us, the kids won't talk to us anymore.
Right.
You stop
Right.
doing the hobbies, and then that goes away, or it gets challenged, or you get some organizational betrayal in there, something, and then we blow up. And I say
Right.
that because that's exactly what I did. I let
Yeah.
all those things go in pursuit of being quote unquote a cop, and then had to be left kind of picking up some of the pieces of that.
Yeah.
What are some of the issues you've seen with partners or friends or subordinates in your current role that you see repeated actions that are going to lead people down a bad path? Maybe it's not the thing,
Right.
but you just know it's a red flag starting early.
Well, I can tell you when I first started this career, I had an old, I don't want to say, well, he was old and crusty, but not in a bad sense. He was just a salty, old school cop that I highly respected. And when I got hired on, I think it was my first week, and he kind of told me there's three things that get every cop. And he called it the three B's, but it's basically money, booze, and women. And those tend to be our downfall in this career. One of those three things will get you, whether it's bills you haven't paid, or getting yourself in deep debt, or whether it is the alcohol or whatever you use as your outlet that's not a good outlet. And sex is one of those. And so then women fall into it. Um, and I can't say that I've been perfect my whole career, because like I told you, there's times where my wife and I struggled. There's times when we were separated and we were on the verge of divorce, and just like what you described, during those times, I thought to myself, because you look around and you see people making the same mistakes over and over again, the infidelity, and then they, because of that, they lose their partner that they were committed to. And I've seen guys just bounce from person to person. And I realized for me, when my wife and I were going through our struggles, I was like I don't want anybody. I want her, and this other stuff can be exciting, but when I get down to the bare bones of it, like I don't love anybody like I love her, and I don't like anybody like I like her. Like I know her, she knows me. Um, we built a lot of history together, so there was a lot there that I was like, why am I? why am I looking over here when everything I need and want is right here? And I've seen guys do that though, where they look over here and then they go over there, and then they've messed that up, and so now they're with this one, and then they were with this one for a little bit, and then they look over there and they go with the next one, and then they're bouncing from relationship to relationship, and they get to the end of their career and they find that they're by themselves and they've destroyed a bunch of relationships. And most of the guys that have done that I talk to, when we sit down and talk honestly, it's the first or second relationship they had that they always are chasing and trying to get back to, but they
Mm.
damage that one so badly that they can never replace it. And so the relationships is huge. Then of course, and I see this, you know, in my position, uh, where substance abuse causes poor judgment, causes bad actions, and gets guys and gals in holes that they can't get themselves out of. So all of a sudden, you know, you're a cop who's supposed to be enforcing the law and upholding the law, and you've just broken the law because they chose to get hammered and drive, and they get in a wreck, and they may hurt somebody, or they're using pills, and same thing, or their addiction, like gambling, they get an addiction and they start spending money like nobody's business, and pretty soon they can get compromised because of that. So it's those things that that I've seen people get in trouble with over and over. And you know, like I said, I'm subject to the same stuff. I'm just another dude, and so I've had that stuff hit me through my career. Luckily, alcohol has never been one for me because I watched my grandpa was an alcoholic, and I watched that as a kid, and so I was always very leery of heavy alcohol use. And I think the gym kind of replaced that for me, because I think the gym is an addiction, but it's a good addiction for me. Um, but that, you know, that drives me. Like if I, much like an alcoholic, missing a drink, if I miss a day at the gym, I'm kind of jonesing, man. Like, oh my God, I missed a day at the gym. I need to get in the gym. So I recognize that that's somewhat of an addiction too, but I think it's a more positive one for me. And so those are the things, the addictions and the filling holes. And I'll be quite frank with you. And some people will shy away from this, but when I got back to my faith, and really like started to go into faith like I had never gone before, I found that, man, a lot of those gaps that we're trying to fill were all filled simultaneously. So any of those spots that I was looking for something to try and fill some void, my faith filled all of those at once.
Mm.
And that changed my whole perspective. And again, not to get too churchy, but you know, it is what it is. And I'm just going to put it out there that if you don't have a belief in some type of higher being and some type of greater power, no matter who your God is, I think if you lack that, that it's going to be tough, because you're going to fall prey to a lot of those other things I discussed.
Yeah, that's a great answer and great response. And it's, um, those behaviors are all pursuing that endorphin or dopamine dump. That risky behavior is
Yep.
really just your lizard brain pursuing that fight or flight response that we're all trying to chase as a result of the hypervigilance.
Yep.
And so I see those same things. I had a great question lined up. It was going to be a fantastic question. It was going to blow your mind, but uh, I I I tend to shy away from this myself, talking about faith,
Mm.
because I'm in on my own journey, I guess you could say, but also I
Yep.
don't want to be dismissive of anybody who has faith or doesn't have faith, etc. But it, I feel like this is worth of bringing up because you touched on it in the right way. You say you came back to your faith.
Yeah.
What put distance between you and the faith originally? Was this something from childhood, or was it because of the job and you were kind of had to be challenged by what you'd seen and kind of
Mm.
like had to confront the discrepancies?
It was absolutely the job, 100%. I was raised a Roman Catholic, and as I got into this job, and it didn't take long of being in this job, I was disenchanted with the entire world. I was disenchanted with the churches because, and I'm going to be quite honest with you, I felt that the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church were a bunch of liars, and that they were protecting child predators, and I was not down with that. And so I felt that it was this big facade, right? And so to me, it was a huge betrayal as I got into this work and I started seeing how people act, and then how people like that we look up to in society, but then you see what goes on behind the scenes because we're the ones responding to the calls, right? And so you're going to these calls where you have um, a priest or a business owner or whoever, these people that are held on a pedestal, and then you see that they're just men and they make the same mistakes, but it disenchants you to the whole thing, because then what I saw anyways from my perspective is that the church a lot of times would hide those actions or would try and just sweep it under the rug, and I wasn't cool with that. And so that's where I kind of got away from it, and I was like, no, I'm not down with this, man. I'm not down with people who hide what they are and who hide what I viewed as bad guys. So that got me away from it. And, quite frankly, it was my middle daughter, man, that got me back, really, because I think where I was in life, I was primed for it. But my middle daughter, with no prompting, was asking me on a consistent basis every week, Daddy, can we go to church? Daddy, can we go to church? Daddy, can we go to church? Like, no, no, babe, we're good, we're good, we're good. And then a series of events happened, and so I really felt she was the mechanism for me getting back to church. And then, like I said, when I got back to my faith, I just realized that, oh, here is what I have been missing. And I can't attribute it to any one thing. I know one of the things that I really like is just being amongst people who are not mad at me and who are not like spitting at me, throwing stuff at me, hating me. Just being amongst people who are all kind of walking their own journey and have their own issues, and you all kind of come together in this building, and you kind of, not that you throw it all out there to each other, but you know that they're all kind of there for the same reason. And so to me, that's not only appealing, but it's very helpful to me, because I think I look around and I see, man, we're all struggling. We're all just humans on this planet together that have problems. We're all trying to figure this life out. And so I think that helps put things in perspective for me, and it kind of re-energizes you.
That's a great answer. It's no secret that in the past few years, criminals and anti-police groups have gotten a lot more bold about challenging law enforcement officers. It's really scary because many of those groups have no problem showing up at an officer's house for protests or to try and intimidate the officer and their families. Even worse, it's easy for criminals to find your home address, and I actually have several partners and friends who have had violent felons show up at their front door after tracking them down on the internet. A lot of cops don't think about these things until they've been involved in a critical incident. New laws in many states require agencies to release the names of officers involved in shootings and uses of force, and it's not uncommon these days for cops to find the media at their front door the next morning. Don't wait until you're dealing with the aftermath of a critical incident to protect you and your family. Get it done today, and I highly recommend officerprivacy.com to help you wipe your name and your information from the top 50 people search sites on the web. Check out the special deal at officerprivacy.com/the squad room, where you'll get 2 free months of monitoring and data removal, plus a free cell phone privacy device when you sign up. You just touched on it. We're all struggling. People are struggling. Sounds stupid. People are human. And so now, as chief deputy of Pinal County, you are the number 2. You basically run the day-to-day operations of a large sheriff's office. You work for probably the most famous sheriff in America at this point, Mark Lamb, who just announced he was running for Senate.
Yep.
But on your end, all of the internal affairs investigations or the discipline, the challenges that come with employees usually come to your level for final disposition, at least on the serious stuff.
Right.
How have you, either throughout your career as you've increased in rank or in the current position you're in, how do you kind of take into consideration the fact that we are all struggling, or people are dealing with things outside of work in the discipline? Because I worked internal affairs, we call it professional standards, but I did that for 4 years, and I had some background in that. I didn't say it was my favorite 4 years.
Right.
But what I see in successful agencies and in agencies that have good recruitment and good retention is there is an element of compassion in the discipline process. And so wasn't really expecting to go down this rabbit hole, but it's a kind of an interesting question of like, how do you, as a one cop to another, look and think about how we can be more empathetic towards our employees or compassionate towards them when they do these things that are going to maybe ruin their career.
Well, one of the hardest things to do, but one of the most important things to do when you're in a position like mine and you have to make a decision about somebody else's life that works for you is trying to remove emotion from that, right? And so I would say that's one of the key factors for us, because there's people that mess up that I absolutely love and would do anything for. There's people that mess up that I would love to fire right now if I could. And that's based on my feelings about them, right? How I feel about that person. And the
Right.
hardest part of this position is removing that feeling and just treating it at face value, and then being empathetic as you go through this process. Because when it hits my desk, it's for final decision, it's for final review, final decision. So I'm looking at all the facts of the case and I'm deciding what's going to happen with this person in their career. And so when I look at those facts, I have to be empathetic to where they're at, what they're going through. And so for an administrator or at an administrative level, I have to make sure that my people understand that. When we first took over as the administration, I felt that our professional standards unit was focused on the wrong things because we were getting very subjective reports that had a lot of opinion inserted, and I didn't agree with that, nor did I like it, because again, I didn't care how people felt about this person. I just needed facts of what happened, what did they do, what policy did they violate, under what circumstances. That's what I needed. So we had to change the culture a little bit too, and get, because in my opinion, PSU had been used as a tool in the past, and not necessarily for good all the time, right? I think they were driven sometimes, and you could probably attest to this doing your time in there. Sometimes you have bosses that tell you, well, look at this a little bit differently, or look into this area a little bit more. And, if you look at it objectively, you're kind of like, it is what it is. Like, it's pretty black and white, but they're saying, no, I think you need to look at it more from this angle. And so you have to get rid of all that crap. You have to get rid of the angles and the subjectiveness as much as possible, and you have to take an objective look at it, and you have to be empathetic at the end. And then you have to remember, especially when it comes down to, I'll give you shootings for an example. When it comes down to shootings where you're kind of like, oof, man, there's some policy violations here, in the way they handled this, or how it went down. Then you have to remember and go back to your critical incidents and be like, yeah, those don't always happen in a textbook fashion, and they don't always, you as the officer performing are making split second decisions with the information you have right then and there. So what you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you believe at that instant when you let rounds go, um, that's what matters. And so, kind of remembering that as you read through stuff, and remembering, okay, here's what my deputy did, or here's what my detention officer did, here's what was going on around them, and you have to try and put yourself in their shoes. And then one step that Sheriff Lamb actually added that I absolutely love and agree with, and I think this is the right way to go for agencies across America. We issue our discipline, and then we allow the employee. The employee always gets the laudermill hearing, right, where they get their discipline, and then they can counter that and tell the administration, like, hey, this is why this went down, and please, consider these facts or whatever. We allow our employees to come in and meet with us face to face, just the sheriff and I. So me, the sheriff, and the employee sit down, and we just have a back and forth with them, like, what were you thinking? Like, what was going through your head? And we've had some really honest and open conversations where we've had people say, like, man, I don't want to tell anybody this. And a lot of times they're embarrassed to tell IA even, but I have this going on in my life. I'm going through a divorce and I don't want anybody to know. She's going to get my kids. I'm stressed out. So they start revealing all this stuff. And that gives you a whole different perspective because you have to put yourself in their shoes. And when you do that, when you take an honest look at it, and when you take a step out of I'm the administrator, and you put yourself in, I'm in this guy's shoes. I'm facing all the stuff he's facing, and I had this thing happen, and this is how I dealt with it. Then you have a better understanding. Not that you agree with it or okay it, but you have a better understanding of why they made the mistake they made. And then we have a discussion with them about discipline, because a lot of times we tell them, like, you're going to get disciplined. Like, you're going to get some days off. You're going to get whatever it may be. And we kind of talk that through with them. And, here's what it's going to look like. And here's why it has to happen. And sometimes we even have to have the discussion with them and educate them. Like, do you know how awful it would look if you did not get disciplined? Do you know what that would do to you on the backside of this? And a lot of them don't understand that. And what I mean is, like, sometimes how they would be viewed by the other employees,
Right.
how the courts would view them moving forward. So there's all these aspects. And I think you have to take all of that into consideration. And one thing that the sheriff always says that rings true for me too is, we talk about being a family here. If your kid messed up, would you kick them out of your family? No. Then why are we trying to do that to employees? We should be trying to help them through these times, not just cut ties and say, you're out of here.
Yeah, no, it's the harder answer, but I think it's the right one. And because
Yeah. Oh, it's not easy.
It's not easy. And it'd be so much easier to just assume that a person is a lost cause
Right.
when we've spent so much time with them and invested into them and care for them, but also just the message it sends to everybody else too, that, with a family is a home. And if you want to create a home from your employees, they need to know that there's a safe space to open up to those things.
Right.
Not that you're going to get a hall pass on the bad stuff, just like
Right.
with my parents or anybody's parents. Like, you still face the discipline and appropriate, but
Yeah.
but that you always have a place to come back to, I guess, is a really key part of it.
And you'll face, if you try this model, because we use this model, you're going to face backlash from some of your executive level staff that absolutely disagree with some of this stuff. You're going to face backlash from your insurance carrier, whether it's a pool or whatever. You're going to face some backlash there because you may retain someone that they're like, oh my God, if we have another case with this person, it's going to result in a lawsuit, and you have to be willing to stand up to all that and say, no, we believe in this person, and we're going to give them. And that's not always the case. There's been employees that we have just cut ties with and had to terminate. And that's not an easy decision, because you realize there's a person behind that badge. You realize there's a family that may be dependent on that income. So you realize all this stuff is going on. But at the same time, you're in this role, especially, you understand that it's almost a business decision at that point, and there is a business to be run in this. And so we have to look at what is the greater good here. And every once in a while, there's, it's just unfortunate that we have to let people go. And some of those people are really not cut out for this career anyways. And so it's better for them in the long run.
The flip side of being that home in the family is that we often, if we don't address the issues, we kind of inculcate a 30-year problem into the agency in our hiring or in our training of people. If like we're adding a problem for 30 years down the road, long after I'm gone, this guy or gal is going to be a headache to the people after me.
Yeah.
It is a tough balance, and it's a challenge, especially for the people who have to make the decisions on it. I want to shift gears back actually to one other part of this idea of identity that we have as we go through our careers. And it's the idea, I think you brought up returning to faith, but creativity is another one. And I kind of had to return to my own creative roots. This podcast is certainly a result of that. It took me years to figure out that I was years into this podcast before I figured out that, this is actually like me returning to a lot of my creative kind of tendencies as a kid and a young adult. And I probably get one email, at least an email a week, if not more, of an officer who said, "Hey, I just retired, or I did this in my career, and I'm going to write a book." And there's so many cops out there that are soon to be authors. So many cops who've threatened to write a book about their amazing experiences. But on the creativity tip, you actually did.
Yeah.
You wrote a book called Interceptors, the Untold Fight Against the Mexican Cartels.
Yes.
And so I'm curious from a creative standpoint, what was it like to decide to write that book, and why did you write it?
The decision to write it was long and drawn out because it was what you're talking about, years of like, man, I should write this down, and people reaffirming that for you, like, dude, that's a crazy story. You should write a book, and having those back and forth, back and forth. But then real life kicks you in the gut, and you're like, dude, when do I have time to write a book? Like, I got to work, and I got family, and I got all this stuff, right? But finally buckling down and deciding like I've got to put this to paper. One of the driving factors was just that. Like I knew that like the contents of my book, I knew that there was a very, very, very small percentage of law enforcement that had done or was doing the type of work that we did in the book. And I knew that it was a piece of US history because I went through it and I know how much attention there was in the US on it, how much the focus was on our area, on our state, on the border itself, on this whole problem. And still, to this day, it's a focal point of our country. And it's actually, one of the deciding factors of people getting into office or not now. So I knew it was a historical place. I knew we had done very unique work. And I was with the people that I worked with day in and day out, and I saw how much they sacrificed. And like we're talking about family, my family sacrificed more during this time frame than anybody because I was working long hours. There was times where I just had to take off. My wife didn't know where I was going or what we were doing. I was just out the door. I had to go. Um, and so all of that kind of drove me to I got to get this stuff documented. And I want to give props to the people that were out there doing this kind of work because I don't want them to ever feel like their fight was for nothing. I think we did good work, and I think they played a key role at the time that I wrote about in that time frame of law enforcement. I think they played a key role. And then just I think it was cathartic for me to go through all that because I'm still in the career. I'm still, I'm an administrator, so I'm not a cop on the street, and I don't try and pretend like I am because that job is a lot different than the job I'm doing now. And so I wanted to get on paper, some of the stuff that we had done, how we had done it, how we had to manage through it. Because I know cops everywhere do the same thing. When they're faced with problems, a lot of times we don't have the resources, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the training. We're on government budgets, but we still figure it out and we still get it done. And so I wanted to memorialize all of that. And then I I think I part of me wanted my family to know, but I didn't want to tell them. Like this was a way of saying, "Hey, here's some of the stuff I did that I never talked about, and like if you want to know, there it is," kind of thing. And so I think that was part of it too. And then of course the sheriff was right behind me, kicking me in the butt, like, "You got to do this, you got to do this." So he was one of the driving factors of me actually starting it and putting in the work and keeping me motivated on it.
Oh, that's great. I think it's having those stories out there is so important. And I think I chuckled when you said it was kind of like a clue to your family too, because I totally get that part of it. But the presence to understand where you're at in the history, like that you're part of history at that moment.
Right,
Because given where you are and dealing with the cartels, it is probably the biggest issue facing law enforcement. I would say that it's definitely the biggest issue facing law enforcement as we sit here today.
right,
Uh, in my county alone, we struggle with with fentanyl now as a result of all this. And for
yeah,
years, I've always said, kind of privately when people ask about these things, like our next war is not going to be with actors in the Middle East. It's going to be with actors in the cartels,
yeah,
and it's going to be
yeah,
some version of that. I just firmly
right.
believe that. So it's it's work that I can't imagine having done, and never been in that capacity. It's kind of mind blowing to me what you guys have dealt with. Um, I want to touch on two other areas of your career. You have your website is One Time Nation, and on Instagram, you're Deputy One Time. There's
Yeah.
got to be a I'm guessing there's a good nickname story in that. Where does that come from?
It's funny because I just got this question yesterday as well from somebody. They're like, "What does this one-time thing mean?" So one time, if you listen to I'm a music guy. I love all kinds of music, and so one time is kind of a dated slang word that gangsters use for cops. They call cops one time. Like if you listen to Cypress Hill, you'll hear them talk about one time in some of their songs. Some of like NWA and some of those back in the day rap groups talk about one time. So that's where I got that because growing up in a gang neighborhood, I heard it all the time. You know, they would yell down the block, one time. So you knew the cops were coming. And so that's where the one time part came from. And then being a deputy, because I always try and instill people like I'm a deputy sheriff, even as my rank right now is chief deputy, but everybody in this agency that is a sworn deputy is a deputy sheriff.
Hmm.
Whether they're a sergeant, lieutenant, it doesn't matter because we are all the sheriff's deputies. And so I love that tradition. I love everything about the sheriff's office and being a deputy for the sheriff. And so being a deputy is big to me. So I had the deputy, and then I had the old school slang term of one time. So I just kind of threw that together. And then the one time nation, where that came from my website was obviously, where one time comes from.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I just figured one time nation is like my website. So if you are a cop, if you're interested in cops, if you um, support cops, like that's all one time nation. That's everybody that is about what we do. And so I kind of just said that's the name.
I love it. That's great. That's probably the one genre of music I'm least familiar with. My wife would kill me because that's totally her game. She would probably know that slang immediately, and I
Oh yeah.
missed it. So, as a fellow music guy, what's your go-to playlist for your days in the gym?
Dude, it's so random. I'm all over the place, man. I really am. There's not like there's days where I'm hardcore gangster rap and it's all about drive-bys and stuff going on in my head while I'm lifting weights.
Yeah.
There's days where I'm pure country, so it's Garth pumping in there, and then there's days where I'm metal, so I'll have some Black Sabbath playing. It's just
Excellent. All right.
you
All
don't
right.
want to
Yeah.
be in my head, dude, because it's so random.
It's funny the music we listen to too, right? Because like this is just like 2 weeks ago. I'm driving my daughter to school, and we're listening to Rage Against the Machine, and she's like, "You realize what you're listening to on your way to go be the man, right?" Like, it's like, yeah, but
Yeah.
it gets me psyched,
Yeah, exactly. That's the irony, when I roll in bumping Cypress Hill, people are
right?
like, "What?"
That's great. That's great. Um, you know, one of the things I'd like to get out there too about your experience, having risen through the ranks, and you're not on the street anymore. Uh, the challenge that I find being in middle management is understanding what the different levels are going through or dealing with.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, command staff, executive staff, particularly, doesn't really grasp what the deputies are dealing with on the street, but it's also the other way. It's also,
Hmm.
the opposite of that, that the deputies or the officers don't understand what the chief is struggling with on a daily basis or the
Right.
undersheriff or a chief deputy. What's something about your current role as the number two in charge of a large agency? What's something you wish the deputies on the street knew about what you were dealing with?
Uh, Probably the biggest thing is just the day-to-day challenges of I don't even want to say politics because it's not really politics, but there is so much behind the scenes work that we're doing at this level to just keep the ship going forward in the direction we want it to go. And I'll give you like raises for an example, right? So we've consistently gotten raises just about every year for our staff, and the amount of work that goes into that they don't understand. They think it's just a matter of, hey, we go over and we say we need raises, and they say okay. They don't understand the relationships that have to be formed behind that, the trust that has to be formed between the sheriff's office and the board of supervisors, who ultimately control the money for the county. The trust that has to be formed and maintained between departments in the county, because our our budget may depend on another, like public works, right? Public works and our budget may be competing for money, and so there's give and take there, and we have to have these high level meetings where we discuss like, okay, the sheriff's office is willing to give a little bit on this if you're willing to give a little bit on that. And so all those negotiations, all those relationships, and the building of trust, the maintaining of trust, and I wish I could just instill in like our line level staff of how much of that is constantly going on and how much we are constantly fighting for them, really. And because our our methodology, and ours being the sheriff and I, our methodology in leading this agency has been to leave it better than what we got it, and set up a legacy of leadership, set up a legacy of leaders who have the same mindset, who have the same goals, the same mission. And we've had some leaders that just don't get it. And so you have to, um, like I was saying with the families, you don't just cut them out. You have to invest more in those leaders, and you actually have to sit down with them and have one-on-one discussions and get them to understand where you're coming from. Because really, leadership is just influence, right? And so it's influencing them in a positive way, and that carries throughout the ranks. Because the number one thing I hear, and it's absolutely true, it was true when I was a deputy and a sergeant, and it's true now as a chief deputy, is the communication isn't as good as it should be. And that's absolutely true. There's always breakdowns. What I would like everybody to know on the street doesn't always make it to them, or it gets the whole telephone game. It becomes a different message by the time it hits their level. And then vice versa. The things they want me to know don't always make it up, because if it did, some person in that chain thinks that that information somehow is detrimental to them, right? Rather than, oh, that's going to make me look bad, instead of, no, that's going to help us fix things. So you have all that stuff going on at this level that you're trying to filter through. And really, the one thing that has helped, I think, both the sheriff and I most is we're just regular guys. And one of the biggest compliments I got recently was one of my buddies on SWAT brought over an FTO from another adjoining city agency, and I know that officer. I know who that officer is, and we've kind of, hey, how you doing, kind of stuff. So our guy brings that officer up. They come up to the sheriff and I's office. The sheriff was out, and I'm just talking to, hey, how you doing? What's going on? How's your sister? Whatever. We're just BSing, and the other person, I'm kind of asking them same stuff, like, hey, what's going on? What have you been up to? Blah blah blah. And when they left, uh, my buddy texted me, said, hey, it was good to see you. Always good to talk to you. And I'm like, yeah, same here. And we don't talk about like department stuff, right? It's just two dudes talking. And the other officer was like, dude, that was amazing. And he's like, what do you mean? And he said, like, I would never be able to talk to my chief like that. Just like, hey, dude, how are you doing? And, how's your kids, and how's, whatever. And I would never, it would be, sir, at attention, sir. Yes, sir. And I would never talk to them anything outside of what the agency stuff was. And that was a huge compliment to me, because I'm just a regular dude, man. And this rank does not define me. It's my job. And if I could be, if if I had a choice, and people said, uh, would I want to be known as a great chief deputy or a great person? Great person wins every time, right? And so I just try and live by that, be a good person. And so I got off track there a little bit, but that all wraps into what I would like line level mid management, because sergeants are the most, and I know sergeants hear this a lot, but they are the key to an agency. They are the absolute backbone, because they're holding up both sides. They are in direct contact with the line level staff, so they set the tone and they set how that performance looks, and they're balancing the admin on the other hand, and they're doing a huge balancing act, and absolutely the backbone of our department. And so I think the sergeants, if they have the best understanding of what I'm talking about, then it's a successful agency, because they'll drive it.
It's so true. And I think one of the hidden secrets about policing is that your chief or your sheriff really has very little influence over the day-to-day culture of the agency,
Mhm.
because it comes down to and then the day-to-day interactions with the public, right? The sheriff
Yep.
can be on the news, he can put out a press release, but this goes for anybody, chief or anybody or sheriff. Uh, on a day-to-day basis, they may interact with 2 or 3 citizens, and it's probably while they're getting their cup of coffee, or it's probably during a press conference, or it's probably
Yep.
in the board of supervisors meeting before public comment. But our deputies and our officers, they're going to contact 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 people in a shift.
Yep.
And that culture that they bring with them to those contacts is what determines what people think about us as an agency and our legitimacy as a profession. And it's why I constantly kind of harp on this idea here on the podcast and at work, that regardless of rank, you're a leader, and I need you
Yeah.
to be a
Oh yeah.
leader. And
Absolutely.
if you signed up for this profession, you're already part of that 1% of the population that stepped up and said, send me. So we
Yep.
need you to take on that leadership role too. What are, because you've done a lot of leadership training, you're clearly a leader. You think of yourself as a good person and not a rank. And that, I think, is the first indication of strong leadership. But if someone in this listening to this conversation, it's 3 a.m. and they're pushing a black and white around and they're thinking, I want to be a leader in my agency, they don't need to wait till they get promoted. They don't need to wait till they're an FTO. What are the things you can tell them to do, like today, to really embrace that idea that they're a leader?
Just be a leader. Just do what you know is right. Because I think I think why I succeeded in leadership roles, like official leadership roles, is because I was a good informal leader first. And so that would be the industry term for it, right? If you're not if you're not like promoted to sergeant, but really you are the person running the squad, and everybody knows this, right? The whole squad knows it. You
Mm-hmm.
may have a sergeant that is somewhat absent, but there's that one officer that everybody looks to, like, hey, what are we going to do? And that officer knows, like, we need to do A, B, and C, and everybody's like, cool, let's go. And even the sergeant's like, yep, what he said. Those are informal leaders, and they're sprinkled throughout the agency. And so they sometimes get more done than our actual formalized leadership does,
Mm-hmm.
just because they choose to step up and take it. And so my advice to any of those cops working the street is, don't wait for somebody else. Like, it's up to you, man. You step up, you do it, you take it by the horns and make a decision and go with it. You know what's right. And a caveat to that is, you have to be the master of your craft too. So that doesn't mean that you spend your extra hours just hanging out watching stupid shows on TV and stuff. That
Right.
means that you are diving into case law. That means that you're hitting any training you can get to. Become the master of your craft, because that makes you that good leader too. Because then you're confident in your skills, you're confident in your abilities, and when those problems pop up, you're like, oh yeah, do this, do that, do this, and like you said, you're a leader, and that doesn't just um, mean a leader at work too. It carries over for home and sports and everything else.
Mm. Excellent advice. Great place to end on. Matthew Thomas, please share with everybody where they can find out more about you, where they can buy the book and follow you.
The easiest place to follow me is on Instagram. That's where I'm most active, and it's at deputy underscore one time. And One Time Nation, they can go to my website. They can grab the book there, or they can click on a link to get the book. Amazon, Apple Books, Kindle. It's on all those formats.
Excellent. It's called Interceptors, the Untold Fight Against the Mexican Cartels. We'll put links in the show notes so everybody can just click through there to find you on socials and find the book. Thanks for your time today, Matt. Great
Yep.
conversation. Really enjoyed, and I really appreciate your candor and your openness. And because these are important things to discuss openly, and
Right.
to share with people and be like, man, if every cop out there knew that it wasn't just them, right?
Right.
In one of these things, we
Yep.
we could save a lot of careers, we could save a lot of lives, I think.
Yep.
And we can't do those things unless people like you in your position are willing to step up and raise their hand and share their story. So I appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, make sure you check through our catalog of episodes, because you're going to find some amazing guests and some great actionable ideas you can take into your day. Also, I want to offer you something I'm very excited about, and it's absolutely free. It's my Tactical Tuesday newsletter. Every Tuesday, I want to bring you a few tactics, tips, and strategies to help you succeed in the week ahead. It may be a book I want to share, some gear I found useful, an inspiring quote, or anything else I think you'd like. To sign up for the Tactical Tuesday email list, you can visit thesquadroom.net/Tactical Tuesdays, or just text your email address to 805-364-2331. That's 805-364-2331. If you didn't catch that, check the show notes for this episode, and you can find it there, and I promise we won't sell or spam your email address. Before we wrap up, I have a challenge for you. If you got something out of this episode, if you were inspired by our conversation today, I want to challenge you right now to take a photo of your podcast player as you're playing this episode, and I want you to share it with 3 friends, people who you think need to hear what we talked about today. Send them this episode and recommend that they listen to it. Also, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice. If you have a few seconds, please leave a comment with your review because it really helps us spread the word about the show and it helps more cops find the valuable lessons that we have here. Also, join us on Facebook at our Facebook group, follow our page, and on Instagram at The Squad Room. A special thanks to today's sponsor, OfficerPrivacy.com. If cleaning up your name on the internet and making it harder for criminals to find you is important, check them out at OfficerPrivacy.com/The Squad Room, where their deal for you as a listener of this show is they'll give you a free USB data blocker and 1 month of free monitoring when you sign up. I want to thank our sponsor for this episode, InTime. InTime is the state-of-the-art, easy-to-use, and incredibly simple way to schedule shifts, improve subpoena compliance, reduce officer fatigue, and manage special events, and much more. Make sure to check them out at intime.com/The Squad Room to learn more about their affordable and simple solutions for public safety. Also, there are some other great companies who support the podcast and support you as well. Go to thesquadroom.net/support to see exclusive deals from Signature Coins, Hard to Kill Fitness, Onnit, Ranger Up, Hardhead Veterans, and Audible. And if you're looking for the best-fitting ballistic helmet that exceeds NIJ standards and won't break the bank, check out hardheadveterans.com and use the coupon code SQUADROOM to get $20 off your helmet. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.